The great American inventor Thomas Edison said, "The three great essentials to achieve anything worthwhile are first, hard work, second, stick-to-itiveness, third, common sense." Edison should know. Although he had more than 1,000 patents on inventions, he also failed many times in pursuit of those successes. What is it that makes some people persevere in the face of failure or rejection and others give up? Angela Duckworth calls it grit. Duckworth is a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, scientific director of the Character Lab, and author of the book Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. So, what is grit?
I define grit as a combination of two things: perseverance for a long-term goal, but also passion for that goal. So pursuing something over the very long run that you care about deeply.
Duckworth devised a grit scale, and she tested it out at the United States Military Academy at West Point. The test presented participants with statements such as, "My interests changed from year to year," and "I am diligent, I never give up," and asked them to rate themselves on a 5-point scale that ranged from not at all like me to very much like me. Despite the obvious talent and intelligence of the cadets at the academy and the rigorous application process they go through just to get in, it was grit that determined if they would stick it out.
At West Point Military Academy, their first summer of training is somewhat affectionately known as Beast Barracks, or sometimes they just call it the Beast. It's a hard time for these young men and women, even though these are some of the best and brightest, most able young adults in the country with the congressional recommendation, top marks. These are varsity athletes. But they often struggle because they're being asked to do things that they can't yet do. And for, half of these cadets, they're going to be in the bottom half, maybe for the first time in their life, of a group of peers. And what we find is that the measure of talent that West Point has used for decades, it's called the whole candidate score, a weighted average of your SATs, your high school rank, your physical ability based on things like the 2-mile run, and your leadership potential as appraised by expert psychologists. This has actually remarkably little to do with whether you finish this beast training or not, whereas grit, measured on day 2 of the training, is actually a reliable predictor.
Duckworth says that the whole candidate score is important, and if the cadets stay at West Point, it's a good predictor of how well they'll do in every aspect that the academy measures.
But it's no guarantee that you'll show up, through the end of that first hard training. And I think that's one of the lessons from my research, that it's not that talent doesn't matter at all. Of course it does. Of course it must. But talent is no guarantee that you'll be the hardest worker or the one who sticks in things for the long run. And I think if we single-mindedly think about talent and IQ as the only determinants, then we are leaving out effort, the quality and the quantity of our effort.
Many people go through life doing what they think they should do without really loving it. How do we find our passion?
I can speak personally to that. I was 32 when I started my PhD program, when I started down the path formally to become the psychologist that I am today. And believe me, I would have started down that path many years earlier if I had actually figured it out. So it was a struggle for me as well to identify, to develop that passion. I think the first lesson is that it does take years for many people to fully develop a passion. It doesn't happen in a moment in time. It doesn't happen the way you think it might, as a kind of epiphany that sort of drops out of the blue. For many of us, we have these interests. They're not quite developed. When we start to do something, the more we learn about it, we get more and more interested in it. Our interests deepen over time. And then ultimately, I think what really becomes a passion is something that we not only find interesting, but also that we find meaningful. And for most people, meaning comes from serving others. So for me as a psychologist, what makes me wake up in the morning with energy to get into the game again is that it's interesting to me, but also I feel like my work will benefit children and other people if I do it well.
Along with purpose, interest, and practice, Duckworth says that hope is necessary to grow grit from the inside out. But it's not the kind of hope that tomorrow will be better than today. The hope she's talking about requires you to make tomorrow better than today.
I think the hope that psychologists really mean when they talk about hope and resilience and being an optimist is the hope that does focus you on what you can do, even if you aren't fully in charge of your situation, which of course none of us are, right? I mean, there is luck in life, good luck and bad luck, and there are opportunities. Sometimes those opportunities are available to us, and sometimes we see the opportunities that other people have that we don't have. have connections to people, that kind of thing. The interesting thing about the people that I study who are highly successful is they don't ignore the fact that there's luck in life and that there are unequal opportunities, but they have a bias to look at the things that they can change. They would rather spend their attention and their energy thinking about what they can do, even if it's not everything, even if it's not most things, but what small thing can they do to change their situation for the better.
Hope is particularly important when things aren't going well. Duckworth says that you need to focus on what you can do to make the situation better for yourself instead of dwelling on the disappointment.
Hope is really the thing that we rely on when you've been disappointed by, a project that you worked very hard on and didn't work out. You got fired maybe, you got a negative review from your boss, you didn't get into the school you wanted. It's there where if you can focus on, okay, moving forward, what is there I can do to make my situation better, that you're much better off than if you dwell on what you can't change.
Duckworth says that bringing up children to have more perseverance and not walk away from difficult tasks is the job of adults, and she charges all of the grown-ups in a kid's life to pitch in and help them by setting a good example, as she did with her daughter.
I think all adults in a child's life do have a role to play in modeling for that child what it means to struggle a little bit, not to be perfect, not to be invulnerable. I cry in front of my children, I show them my disappointments, but to model for them what it means to get up again. They've seen me go to bed weeping because I couldn't write the next chapter of my book, but they saw me get up again and have a cup of coffee and sit down and take a deep breath and try again. And when she grew up, not only did we try to model for her grit and to share with her our own vulnerabilities and our own, imperfection, our own struggle to find our passion, to develop that passion. We also tried to get her to be involved in activities with other quote-unquote parents, other teachers and coaches who would be able to teach her those lessons. And she was hugely benefited, I think, by having a great viola teacher and a great track coach. And I think those many experiences do add up. No child, I think, is born knowing what they need to do, and no child is born having all the grit that we hope that they might have.
Not only do adults need to model grit for their kids, Duckworth says that leaders in the workplace should do the same for their employees.
Some of the greatest leaders that I've talked to, I'm thinking of J.P. Morgan's CEO, Jamie Dimon, or the general who's in charge of West Point Military Academy. They will so often spontaneously bring up in conversation their own role as parents. And I think they see a symmetry there, that what it means to be a great leader at work is in some ways the same thing as it means to be a great parent to children. And that is to provide not only role modeling, but two additional things: to set a culture that is high expectations, that is challenging, that people are constantly being asked to do things a little better than they did before. And with that, support. The idea that you've got the back of the people who are working with and for you. So the kind of things that you would want to do as a parent, challenging your kid, but telling them every day, this is a joint project. Like, we are in it to make you successful. Both you and I have a role to play, and I'll never desert you. I respect you, and I'm here for you. I think that's what the greatest leaders that I've studied do, and in doing that, I think they really do encourage grit.
Duckworth says that we need perseverance in other aspects of our lives, but it's not the same thing as having grit. If you want to save more money, lose weight, or start that exercise program, you need to focus on it. But that kind of dedication falls under a different category.
Those other things are important, so is paying your taxes and, abiding by laws. But for those things, I think it's actually not necessarily grit, but a close cousin that I also study as a psychologist, and that is self-control. And I do think that it's important to say that, grit is the hallmark of the high achievers that I have studied in every domain. And I do think there is something about the combination of being enduringly passionate and persevering about a goal that helps you succeed. But it's not the only thing, and there are other responsibilities that we have, pay our taxes, stay on the diet, do the things that we need to do. And for those, we need things like self-control, conscientiousness, and of course, if you really want to ask the question about an overall successful life, then you need many other things like being grateful and honest, kind and curious, and none of those things are identical to grit.
So if you don't make that long-haul goal you set, if you bow out of West Point before the summer is over, or if you can't make the cut to become the concert pianist you always wanted to be, Are you a failure?
I think the most important thing about the research that I'm doing and that other psychologists are doing is to recognize that people really are growing, learning, adaptive creatures. We're not fixed. We're not static. And so sometimes when things like this happen, we're like, oh, I'm a loser or oh, I'm a failure. But I think the idea is that, no, you're a human being and, you make decisions the best you can and you're constantly learning. One of the things that psychologists like to talk about when they talk about development over the life course is the maturity principle, and that is that qualities like grit, conscientiousness, being nice, very positive, desirable qualities that we consider to be what a mature, wise person would be like, these actually do increase over the lifespan. So I think we should be compassionate about ourselves and not expect perfection. I spent too much time as a young woman trying to be perfect. I think that in a way was unnecessary roughness. I should have just recognized that I was doing my best and I was evolving, and I made a lot of good decisions. I made some bad ones, and I learned from all of them.
You can learn more about her research into what makes people succeed in Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, available now in stores and online. She also invites listeners to her website at angeladuckworth.com, where you can find out where you land on her grit scale. For more information about all of our guests, log on to our site at viewpointsonline.net. You can find archives of past programs there and on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm Gary Price.
June is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. The Alzheimer's Association is encouraging everyone to learn the truth about Alzheimer's. First, Alzheimer's is not normal aging, and with a wide variety of possible symptoms, it's more than just memory loss. The truth is that Alzheimer's disease is fatal, and even though it can't be prevented, cured, or even slowed, early detection matters, according to Ruth Drew, Director of Family and Information Services of the Alzheimer's Association.
An early diagnosis of Alzheimer's allows people living with the disease and their families more time to plan for the future. It also allows these individuals to get the most out of treatments that may address symptoms and help maintain independence longer. They may also be able to participate in a clinical trial to help researchers discover a cure. It's important for people living with Alzheimer's to access care and services early so they and their families can live the best life possible.
Take time to learn the truth about Alzheimer's disease. Get started at alz.org/truths. That's alz.org/truths.
Medicare and their list of suppliers continue to change, so if you have diabetes, it may affect where you get your testing supplies. But rest assured that your number one doctor-recommended one-touch testing supplies are always covered by Medicare Part B at your local pharmacy and select mail-order suppliers. Dr. Brian Levy, Chief Medical Officer at LifeScan, maker of one-touch products.
Some mail-order suppliers may offer a limited selection of diabetes testing supplies. They may try to switch you to a different brand, saying your current products are no longer covered. That's just not true. You are entitled to continue using the products you know and trust and that have been recommended by your healthcare professional at no additional cost.
Remember, you have a choice. Stay with the number one brand used by Medicare patients. For questions about coverage or where to get your one-touch testing supplies, call 1-844-942-2654 or visit www.onetouch.com/Medicare. Medicare Part B is not a guarantee of coverage and payment, which may be subject to coinsurance, deductible, and patient eligibility requirements.
Everyone knows it's no fun getting sick, but what you may not know is that a simple measure like hand hygiene can significantly reduce the chances of getting sick and passing along illnesses in the office. A new study finds that the availability of alcohol-based hand sanitizer and hand sanitizing wipes can significantly reduce employee health care claims tied to hand hygiene preventable illnesses. The study's lead author, Dr. Jim Arbogast of Gojo, explains.
This is the first study with scientific evidence showing a direct correlation between good hand hygiene by the public and the reduction of healthcare claims from doctors' visits. We found that a comprehensive hand hygiene program in the workplace, including Purell hand sanitizer and the hand sanitizing wipes, reduces healthcare claims of hand hygiene preventable illnesses by over 24% and reduces unscheduled paid time off by more than 13%.
Gojo and Medical Mutual of Ohio, the state's largest health insurer, collaborated on the study. For more information on the study findings, visit gojo.com/Purell Advanced Workforce.